All right, time to bring in our panel now this afternoon, and joining us, as they do each Monday afternoon, our political strategist Grahame Morris and Bruce Hawker. A very good afternoon to both of you. Let me start on the situation in Syria, because this is, well, a big incident that, as I say, could have wide ramifications. We've already seen a lot of anger expressed by the Syrians, by the Russians as well. This accidental bombing of Syrian government forces rather than Islamic State forces, as were meant to be targeted. Bruce, we've seen the Australian government express condolences, express regret. We've seen similar from the Americans as well. We don't know much about how this happened. A lot of curious elements about it, but it doesn't augur well for a war that's already riddled with a lot of complexity and confusion about it already.
Well, hopefully it doesn't bear out the old adage that in war the first casualty is truth. Because situations like this really do require thoroughgoing review and examination, if for no other reason than to make sure that something like this never ever happens again, or hopefully doesn't happen again. I mean, of course, the reality is that in war you do have these terrible incidents, probably much more frequently than people would understand or expect. But we do need to have a thoroughgoing and hopefully transparent review to the extent, and this would be the only caveat, that it doesn't compromise security questions for the Australian and other allies operating in the Middle East.
But are you saying a separate Australian inquiry? I know Nick Xenophon, Andrew Wilkie have suggested that, and while on the face of it that sounds like a good idea, but you just can't see how. I mean, what do? You appoint someone like Angus Houston, for example, to conduct a review. How are they going to be able to establish, in an effective, efficient, timely way, what's gone on here?
I wasn't suggesting that there would be an Australian review only. I'm saying that in the conduct of the review, presumably under the auspices of the Americans, there would be as much transparency as security considerations permit. And I think that's the big question mark, that will have to be answered at some stage. Was it, if information is withheld, was that because of security, or was it because they were looking to cover up a negligent act? And I think it would. I don't think anyone is seriously suggesting that any of these allies would have been hit deliberately. It was one of these terrible things.
The Syrians are suggesting that, but you get the sense, Grahame Morris, to you on this, that they and the Russians to a degree will latch onto any incident like this to claim the high moral ground. There's meant to be some information sharing between the Americans and Russians before they conduct one of these bombing missions, and apparently the New York Times says the Americans did inform the Russians, but then they came back 20 minutes after the bombs started dropping and said, hang on, you're hitting the wrong guys.
Look, with today's technology and intelligence, it's actually hard to understand what on earth happened here. It doesn't help the whole theatre of war there, where you've got sort of uglies and less uglies. But the idea of having another inquiry on top of the international inquiry just seems stupid to me. Our inquiry is better than your inquiry. There should be one big inquiry.
If there's a need for another one after that, maybe, but...
Oh, well, maybe, but I can't see what on earth somebody in Canberra could contribute to an inquiry that's not going to happen to those in the actual theatre. No, I would be making sure that our people were involved in the inquiry and that everything came out within the bounds of common sense. There are some things that you just cannot put in the public.
We'll see where that goes. Let's talk about what's been happening here. It was a pretty good week for the Prime Minister last week, getting some deals done and things through Parliament when Parliament was sitting. Now I suppose the attention turns to what more can be achieved. And the Attorney-General yesterday was talking about maybe compromising on the same-sex marriage plebiscite. Labor says they haven't been approached yet over this. But Bruce, what do you first on this? Do you think there's a way of making the plebiscite more palatable for its opponents, for Labor in particular?
Look, I struggle to see how it would be, because it's set at a reasonably low bar at the moment. I mean, I don't think the question is particularly offensive. I think it just comes down to a question of whether the appropriate forum to determine this issue is the Parliament, or whether it should be the a broader Australian
And that's a pretty
electorate.
fundamental hurdle, right? If you're going to have a plebiscite, you can't do much about that.
Exactly right. So I don't really see great prospects for change there, unless, of course, there'd be some mood inside the Labor Party to allow the plebiscite if it looks like there's going to be no prospect of it getting through the Parliament.
Is there any such mood, do you think?
I don't really see it. I know that there would be people who would be saying, look, let's get the thing sorted one way or another. But I don't think that would be the prevailing view, and I don't think it's necessarily the view inside the gay community either. So I think they have to have an eye on that. Personally, I've always thought that if it takes a plebiscite to determine this issue, then let's do it. But I do take the argument that parliaments are elected to make tough decisions, and we give people conscience votes when we're in these difficult areas. And what's so different about this to other
Well, it's interesting
areas?
because, because Grahame, this is kind of the point George Brandis himself was making yesterday here on Sky News. He was saying, well, Labor could legitimately criticise this because it's not the normal way we deal with these issues. Parliament is the way. Yet Labor is more critical of the money being spent and the hate messages it fears are going to come out of this. But the Attorney General seems to be saying, look, if you're going to criticise it, here's how you should do it.
Yeah,
very helpful.
Let's go back to the first question. Is there room for compromise? Well, look, there's nothing wrong with the question, and the government has said all along we're going to have a plebiscite. The thing that I don't understand is how Senator Penny Wong can run around, if the plebiscite is knocked off, can run around to the gay, lesbian, intersex, transsexual, queer communities and say, hey, the marriage thing is off for at least another 3 years. That's what's going to happen. That if the plebiscite does not go ahead, it's off. Now, what is the one thing that the government could negotiate? Well, maybe that if we all vote for a plebiscite, then I guarantee the Parliament will have a vote within 4 weeks.
This is the self-executing
That is
mechanism.
progress. Anything short of that, I think, if the Labor Party knocks this off, they will have to explain to their mates why there is no activity.
Labor would say because we'll keep moving private members' bills. It can be done in a day in Parliament. But that's the he said, she said.
But that's not the policy.
All right,
but it is also. I mean, there is the reality that this so-called solution favours the government as well in having a plebiscite because they don't have to take it into the Parliament and force some of their more conservative members to vote on the issue. I think that's something which we shouldn't lose sight of in this whole thing. The thing that worries me, though, is that it's a bit like the referendum on the monarchy. In the end, one of the things that destroyed it was division inside the progressive side of politics, where they're all fighting amongst themselves about the form of the monarchy or the form of the republic that was going to replace the monarchy, and that ended up destroying the issue as far as the referendum was concerned. I hope that doesn't happen here. That's my only concern.
What's going on in WA politics? Grahame, we saw, it wasn't all that long ago, I suppose, that on the Labor side, Stephen Smith, the former federal minister, was contemplating a crack at the leadership. Now you've got a couple quitting from the Liberal frontbench. Dean Naldo is in his first term as an MP. He wants to have a crack at the leadership, but it doesn't look like he's going to get anywhere close.
Well, look, there are very good judges who will tell me that Mr Naldo's sort of IQ is running about 20% ahead of his ability. This is really silly stuff. 5 months out from election being called, causing instability. It may well be that after the election, other good judges tell me the Deputy Premier, she would be a real option as a new leader. But let's say you change leaders now. Is that going to fix? Is it going to bring back the mining boom in Western Australia? No. Would it be a stronger team? No. Everyone has got to get behind the Premier and make this work in 4 months. The idea that you have a change now and somebody thinks it's better, it's not better.
I guess a lot of this, Bruce, is about fears they're going to lose government come the election early next year. What's your sense of it? I mean, Labor's been out of office now for 2 terms, but the economy's changed a lot since then.
Oh, it has. It was a boom state when Labor lost 2 terms ago. And now, I mean, the odds are very much on Labor winning the next election. Mark McGowan's been a really solid opposition leader. He's just gone about doing his business day in, day out, and capitalising on shortcomings inside the government and I think a real sense in the Western Australian community that things are going badly and the government has got to be accountable for it. And that, of course, is why Nalda is now talking about challenging Colin Barnett. But I don't think it's going to make any difference to the outcome if Nalda were to take over the leadership. I don't think he's some sort of charismatic figure who's going to suddenly transform the Liberal government. And so when you do see this desperate rearrangement of the deck chairs, it's usually because we're all sitting on the Titanic when it happens. And I don't really think that there's much prospect for the government in Western Australia, whether it's led by Barnett or by anybody else at the next election. I think Mark McGowan's going to win it, provided he has a solid campaign. And I think he will. Isn't Grahame one of the big game changers in WA politics? Brendan Grill's returning to the leadership of the National Party there and putting forward the idea of an increased state mining royalty. We know the Libs don't much like that, but they may have to rely on the Nats to form government once again. Well, it's amazing, after an election campaign, if you need to find a mate somewhere to form a government, you'll find the mate. No doubt about that. But look, the trick is to get behind the Premier, pull things together, have a proper campaign that has a go at the Labor Party. At the moment, there's so much navel-gazing that the Labor Party is looking good. And in fact, they'd be terrible. Well, is that because of... why do you say they'd be terrible? What's the... Well, if you just have a look at their form, have a look at their talent, have a look at some of their ideas, they're sort of cockamamie stuff. They're just not ready. They may well be in 2 or 3 years. They're not ready to govern. Yeah, the West is in a very tricky cycle at the moment, and it's not a time to experiment with some Labor Party goons. Well, I guess that's going to be the line they're going to try to run from here on into the next election. But anybody that's seen Mark McGowan and the way in which he conducts himself knows that you've got a very solid, middle-of-the-road, steady as she goes Labor leader, the sort that Labor has produced to great effect in Western Australia in the past. I'm thinking people like Jeff Gallop, very, very steady leadership, in tune and responsive to the rhythms of Western Australian politics and the economy as well. I know Jeff Gallop. This bloke's no Jeff Gallop. Well, I know them both, mate, and I can tell you that he is a very, very solid leader. All right, well, we'll see how they all go. We'll have to leave it there. Bruce Hawker, Grahame Morris, thank you both very much for joining us. We'll catch you both next week. Now, as we've been